At our family reunion, my aunt glared across the table and said, "You don't even count. You're just the kid they should have left behind." My sister snorted. My parents stayed silent. And right then, with plates still full and rich, I stood up and said, "This isn't your reunion. This is my property. Get out." I, 32M, never thought a family reunion would end with me kicking out half my relatives, but here we are. For context, I'm the youngest of 3 kids. My older sister always acted like she was royalty, and my brother moved across the country years ago to avoid family drama. Growing up, I was the accident baby. My parents had me when they were 45, thinking they were done with kids. My aunt, my mother's sister, never let me forget it. The reunion was supposed to be at my parents' house like always, but 3 weeks before, Dad had a heart attack. Nothing fatal, but doctor's orders were clear: no stress, no hosting big events. Mom was panicking about canceling when I offered my place. Here's what nobody knew. 2 years ago, I bought a massive property outside town. 6 bedrooms, huge kitchen, acres of land. I'd been saving since college, working 2 jobs, investing everything. When the previous owner's family needed to sell quickly after his death, I made a cash offer. The whole family assumed I was still renting that tiny apartment downtown because I never corrected them. The morning of the reunion, I spent hours preparing. Catered food, rented tables, the works. When the first cars pulled up, I watched from the kitchen window as my relatives stared at the house in confusion. My cousin called someone, probably asking if she had the wrong address. Mom and Dad arrived first, and I could see the shock on their faces. Dad asked how I could afford such a place, and I explained about the savings, the investments, the years of living below my means. Mom looked proud but confused, like she was seeing me for the first time. Then my sister arrived with her husband and kids. She stepped out of her BMW, looked around, and I heard her asking Mom whose house this was. When Mom pointed to me through the window, my sister's face went through about 5 different expressions before settling on irritated. The afternoon started well enough. People were impressed with the house, the food, the setup. My uncle complimented the wine selection. My cousins asked about the property taxes, clearly fishing for information about what I'd paid. I deflected most questions, just saying I'd gotten lucky with timing. But then dinner started, and with it, the usual family dynamics. My aunt, who'd been drinking wine since she arrived, began her typical commentary. She started with small digs about how surprising it was that I could manage such a big event, considering how I'd always been the irresponsible one. My sister chimed in with stories about my teenage years, painting me as the family screw-up who never had his act together. I stayed quiet, serving food, refilling drinks. This was their pattern: build themselves up by tearing me down. I'd learned years ago that fighting back just gave them more ammunition. The conversation shifted to family achievements. My sister talked about her husband's promotion, how they were looking at vacation homes. My cousin bragged about her daughter's acceptance to medical school. Everyone was performing their success, and I was just the hired help apparently. That's when my aunt really got going. She started talking about family legacy, about how some people contribute to the family name and others just coast along. She mentioned how disappointed my grandparents would have been to see how I turned out. Still single, no impressive career title, living paycheck to paycheck as far as they knew. My sister was nodding along, occasionally adding her own observations about my life choices. My parents sat there saying nothing, which somehow hurt worse than the actual insults. Then came the moment that changed everything. My aunt, emboldened by the wine and the silent audience, looked directly at me and delivered her verdict. She told me I didn't even count, that I was just the kid they should have left behind. The words hit the table like a slap, and the whole room went quiet except for my sister, who snorted with laughter. I looked around the table at these people, my family, sitting in my house, eating food I'd paid for, drinking wine from my cellar, and treating me like garbage. My parents just stared at their plates. My sister was still smirking. My aunt looked satisfied with herself. Something snapped. I stood up slowly, and the room got even quieter. I looked around the table at all of them. The people who'd spent years making me feel small, who'd assumed I was a failure because I didn't brag about my accomplishments. That's when I told them the truth. I informed them that this wasn't their reunion anymore. I explained that this was my property, that I owned every inch of it, and that they needed to leave. The silence that followed was deafening. My aunt's face went white. She stammered that I couldn't be serious, that it was just family banter. My sister demanded to know how I could afford such a place, her voice getting shrill. My parents looked shocked, asking if I really meant it. I absolutely meant it. I walked to the front door and held it open. I told them they had 10 minutes to get their things and go. My aunt tried to apologize, saying she'd had too much wine, that she didn't mean anything by it. My sister accused me of being dramatic, said I was ruining the family gathering over a joke. But it wasn't a joke. It was years of accumulated cruelty disguised as family tradition. Most of them left without much more protest, shooting me angry looks as they gathered their purses and jackets. My aunt was the last to go, still trying to convince me that I was overreacting. I stood at the door and watched her car disappear down the driveway. Only my parents remained, sitting at the now empty table surrounded by half-eaten plates of expensive catered food. Dad asked if I really wanted them to leave too. The question hung in the air between us. These were the people who'd raised me, but they were also the people who'd sat silent while I was verbally torn apart at my own table. I told them they could stay, but that we needed to talk. We spent the next hour having the most honest conversation we'd had in years. I explained how their silence over the years had hurt me, how it felt like they were endorsing the way my aunt and sister treated me. They apologized, said they'd always tried to keep the peace, but admitted they should have stood up for me. Mom cried a little, saying she'd had no idea I felt so alone in the family. Dad admitted he was proud of what I'd accomplished, but didn't know how to show it without seeming like he was taking sides. We cleared the dishes together, and for the first time in years, it felt like we were actually a family. Update 1. The fallout started the next morning. My phone was buzzing constantly with texts and calls from relatives demanding explanations, apologies, and in my sister's case, threats to ruin me socially in our family circle. My aunt sent a long text about how hurt she was, how she'd always considered me like a son, how I'd humiliated her in front of everyone. She conveniently forgot the part where she'd told me I should have been left behind. My sister was more direct. She called me pathetic, said I was having some kind of breakdown, and demanded to know how I'd really gotten the money for the house. She seemed convinced I'd done something illegal or unethical. I ignored most of it, but saved the messages. Something told me I'd need them later. The real surprise came from my cousins. 2 of them reached out privately to apologize and ask if we could talk. Apparently, my aunt and sister had been treating others in the family the same way for years, and seeing someone finally stand up to them had been cathartic. My cousin Sarah told me she'd wanted to leave her own wedding early because my aunt spent the entire reception criticizing her dress, her choice of venue, even her husband. She said watching me kick them out was the most satisfying thing she'd seen in years. But the biggest shock came 3 days later when my brother called from Seattle. He'd heard about the reunion through Mom, and instead of being angry, he was proud of me. He confessed that one of the reasons he'd moved so far away was to escape the family dynamics, especially my aunt's constant criticism and my sister's need to be the center of attention. He told me something I'd never known. Years ago, when he'd gotten his first big promotion, my aunt had actually tried to convince our parents that he was getting too big for his britches and needed to be brought down a peg. He'd overheard the conversation and realized that no success would ever be enough for some people in our family. We talked for 2 hours, and for the first time, I understood that I wasn't the only one who'd felt like an outsider. Update 2. 2 weeks after the reunion, my sister escalated things. She'd apparently been doing research, trying to figure out how I'd afforded the house. She called my old landlord, my bank, even contacted my employer asking questions about my salary. When that didn't give her the ammunition she wanted, she decided to create her own narrative. She started telling people that I must be involved in something shady, drug dealing, money laundering, fraud. She had no evidence, but she spread the rumors at her book club, her kids' school events, anywhere she could find an audience. The rumors eventually made it back to me through my cousin Sarah, who was horrified. She told me my sister had even suggested to some relatives that they should be concerned about being associated with me if I was involved in illegal activities. That's when I decided to fight back. I'd been planning to keep my financial success private, but my sister had forced my hand. I gathered documentation, bank statements showing years of consistent savings, investment account records, pay stubs from my 2 jobs, even the real estate transaction showing I'd paid cash. Then I created a family group chat with everyone who'd been at the reunion. I shared everything. Every bank statement, every investment return, every pay stub from the years I'd worked 60-hour weeks while living in a studio apartment and eating ramen. I showed them the timeline of my savings, how I'd lived on less than 30% of my income for years, how I'd researched and made smart investments. The response was immediate and devastating for my sister. Suddenly, everyone could see that not only was I completely legitimate, but I'd been more financially disciplined and successful than any of them realized. My uncle commented that he was impressed by my investment strategy. My cousin asked for advice about his own savings plan. My sister went quiet in the chat, but I wasn't done. I posted screenshots of her texts calling me pathetic and threatening to ruin me. I included her accusations about illegal activity and her attempts to investigate my finances behind my back. Then I asked a simple question. If she was really concerned about illegal activity, why hadn't she gone to the police instead of spreading rumors? The chat exploded. Relatives who'd initially been neutral started calling out my sister's behavior. My aunt tried to defend her, but even she had to admit that spreading unfounded accusations about criminal activity was crossing a line. My sister left the group chat, but the damage was done. The family had seen exactly who she was, and more importantly, who I'd become despite years of their doubt. Update 3. A month later, the family dynamics had completely shifted. My parents started visiting regularly, usually bringing dinner and staying to help with projects around the property. Dad, recovered from his heart attack, seemed to find purpose in helping me build raised garden beds and repair fencing. Mom decorated the guest rooms and started referring to visits as going to our son's estate. My brother flew in for a long weekend, and we spent hours walking the property and talking about everything we'd never discussed. He was considering moving back to the area, partly because he felt like the family was finally becoming healthy enough to be around. My cousin Sarah asked if she could have her daughter's graduation party at my place. When I agreed, she cried and told me it meant the world to her to have a family celebration somewhere she felt safe and supported. But the biggest change was in how I saw myself. For years, I'd internalized my aunt's criticism and my sister's dismissal. I'd achieved financial success, but felt like a failure because they'd convinced me that quiet accomplishment wasn't real accomplishment. That you had to perform your success, brag about it, make others feel small to prove your worth. Kicking them out wasn't just about defending myself. It was about refusing to let their toxicity poison my space and my relationships with the family members who actually cared about me. My sister eventually reached out through Mom, asking if we could move past this. She wanted to bring her family for Thanksgiving, like nothing had happened. Mom asked what I thought, and I realized I had a choice to make. I told Mom that my sister was welcome to come, but only if she was ready to apologize, not just to me, but to the other family members she'd hurt over the years. And more importantly, if she was ready to change how she treated people. Mom relayed the message, and my sister's response was exactly what I expected. She said she had nothing to apologize for, that everyone was being too sensitive, and that I was power-tripping because I had a nice house now. So I made my decision. I told Mom that anyone who wanted a relationship with me needed to treat me with basic respect. It wasn't about the house or the money. It was about human decency. Thanksgiving was small that year. Just me, my parents, my brother and his girlfriend who flew in, and Sarah with her family. We cooked together, ate around my kitchen island instead of the formal dining room, and laughed until our stomachs hurt. It was the best family gathering I'd ever experienced. As I looked around that kitchen, watching my dad teach my nephew how to carve turkey while my mom and Sarah's daughter made pie, I realized something important. Family isn't about blood or obligation or tradition. It's about the people who choose to show up for you, who treat you with love and respect, who celebrate your wins instead of trying to tear you down. My aunt was right about one thing. I didn't count in the family dynamic they'd created, but I'd built something better. I'd built a family based on mutual respect and genuine affection, and I'd done it in a house I'd earned through years of hard work and sacrifice. The kid they should have left behind had become the man who brought everyone home. Looking back now, 6 months later, I don't regret a single moment of that confrontation. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself, and for the people who truly care about you, is to refuse to accept treatment that diminishes your worth. I learned that respect isn't something you can demand or argue into existence. You can only demonstrate what you'll accept and what you won't. That night, surrounded by the ruins of expensive catered food and the silence of people who'd underestimated me for years, I finally learned to value myself the way I deserved. And sometimes, that's the greatest revenge of all. not destroying the people who hurt you, but building a life so fulfilling that their opinions become irrelevant.